Lubinda exposes government's PF power grab, what this really means for Zambia. Can the government interfere in the internal affairs of a political party? That is the explosive question now facing Zambia after Given Lubinda declared that the state has no authority over Patriotic Front matters. Is this a constitutional defense? Or a political shield? Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. Well, it's been quite a week here, hasn't it? The political temperature in Lusaka has been rising, and today, we're diving into something that has sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. Today's lead story, a bombshell accusation that threatens to expose the very foundations of Zambia's democratic process. Picture this: the chamber doors close. The lights dim on transparency. And in those shadows, a plan unfolds. A calculated maneuver to reshape the balance of power, not through the ballot box, but through backdoor dealings and constitutional manipulation. This is the portrait painted by none other than Given Lubinda, the former Minister of Justice and a stalwart of the opposition Patriotic Front. But here's where it gets interesting, viewers. What if everything you thought you knew about your government's commitment to democratic principles was a carefully constructed illusion? What happens when the very people sworn to uphold the Constitution are accused of twisting it for political gain? When does legitimate governance cross the line into authoritarian power consolidation? And who benefits when the rulebook is rewritten in secret? Is this a genuine threat to Zambia's hard-won democracy, or is it the desperate cry of a party watching its influence slip away? Can we trust the accusers, or are they simply bitter about losing their grip on power? And perhaps most crucially, if these allegations hold even a grain of truth, what does it mean for every Zambian citizen who believed their vote still mattered? The stakes, my friends, couldn't be higher. Because if Lubinda is right, we're not just talking about political maneuvering, we're talking about the systematic dismantling of democratic safeguards. And if he's wrong? Well, then we need to ask ourselves, why would a former justice minister stake his reputation on such explosive claims? Factual foundation. The revelation came to light during a fiery press conference held in Lusaka this past week, where Given Lubinda, now serving as the Patriotic Front's chief whip in parliament, stepped before cameras with accusations that would dominate headlines across the nation. The context is crucial here, viewers. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Since the United Party for National Development, the UPND, swept into power in the August 2021 elections, ending the PF's decade-long rule, tensions between the government and opposition have been, let's call it, volcanic. President Hakainde Hichilema's administration has pursued what it calls anti-corruption measures, resulting in the arrest and prosecution of several former PF officials, including former President Edgar Lungu himself. But according to Lubinda, there's something far more sinister at play beneath the surface of these prosecutions. It began with whispers in parliamentary corridors, concerns about the government's approach to constitutional amendments, questions about the sudden urgency in pushing through certain legislative changes. Then came the public statements, carefully worded at first, testing the waters. But last week, Lubinda abandoned all pretense of diplomatic language. Standing before a packed room of journalists, he laid out what he characterized as a systematic plan. A power grab designed not just to neutralize the opposition, but to fundamentally alter Zambia's democratic architecture. The specific trigger? Proposed amendments to electoral laws and parliamentary procedures that Lubinda claims would concentrate unprecedented power in the hands of the ruling party. He pointed to three key areas: changes to the voter registration process, modifications to parliamentary quorum requirements, and perhaps most controversially, adjustments to the constitutional provisions governing presidential eligibility and succession. The timeline, as Lubinda presented it, stretches back months. According to him, these weren't reactive policies or gradual reforms. They were, he insisted, part of a blueprint carefully orchestrated, methodically implemented, and deliberately obscured from public scrutiny until it was almost too late to resist. Direct evidence. Now, let's hear from the man himself. Because Lubinda didn't mince words, and his testimony, delivered with the authority of someone who once sat at the highest levels of government, demands our attention. What we are witnessing, Lubinda declared, his voice steady but tinged with barely contained frustration, is not governance. This is not the democracy that Zambians fought for, that Zambians died for. What we are seeing is a calculated, systematic attempt to rig the system. Not just for one election, but for a generation. He continued, leaning forward, the UPND government, under President Hichilema, is using the very institutions meant to protect our democracy as weapons against it. They talk about fighting corruption, yes, but look deeper. Every arrest, every prosecution of PF members, these aren't just about accountability. They're about elimination. They're about removing anyone who might challenge them in 2026. When pressed by journalists about specific evidence, Lubinda didn't retreat. Reporter, Mr. Lubinda, these are serious accusations. Can you provide concrete examples of this alleged power grab? Lubinda, concrete examples? Let me give you several. First, look at the proposed amendments to the Electoral Process Act. They want to centralize voter registration under bodies they control completely. Second, they're pushing to change parliamentary procedures so that they can pass legislation with reduced quorum requirements. What does that tell you? It tells you they want to ram through laws even when opposition MPs raise legitimate concerns. And third, and this is perhaps most alarming, there are quiet discussions about constitutional amendments that would, let me be clear about this, that would essentially make it impossible for certain individuals to challenge them electorally. Reporter, are you suggesting they're trying to bar former President Lungu from running again? Lubinda, I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as fact. The entire architecture of their so-called reforms points in one direction: permanent UPND dominance. They saw what happened in 2021, they won, yes, but they also saw how close it could have been, how quickly public sentiment can shift. So now, they're building safeguards. Not for the country, for themselves. He paused, then added with emphasis, you know, when we were in government, the UPND accused us of authoritarian tendencies. They cried foul at every turn. And now? Now they're doing exactly what they accused us of, but worse, because they're doing it with the moral authority of new leaders and changemakers. It's the ultimate hypocrisy. Another journalist interjected, but minister, critics would say the PF is simply bitter about losing power. How do you respond to accusations that this is just political theater? Lubinda's response was sharp: political theater? Let me tell you what's theater: prosecuting opposition members on flimsy charges while your own officials face no scrutiny. That's theater. What I'm exposing is real. These are documented proposals, legislative drafts, internal memos that reveal their true intentions. We have seen this playbook before, in other African countries. Start with anti-corruption, move to reform, and end with dictatorship dressed up as democracy. Deeper analysis. So viewers, let's step back and examine what this really means, not just for the PF or UPND, but for Zambia's democratic trajectory. First, the legal dimension. Constitutional experts have been divided on Lubinda's allegations. Dr. Sishiwa, a prominent political historian, noted in a recent interview that Zambia has a history of ruling parties attempting to consolidate power through constitutional manipulation. From Konda's one-party state to more recent attempts at extending presidential term limits, the pattern is concerning. Whether the current government is following that pattern remains to be proven, but the accusations alone reveal deep institutional mistrust. On the other hand, government spokesperson Cornelius Mwikwa dismissed Lubinda's claims as desperate propaganda from a party that cannot accept its defeat. He argued that every reform this government has proposed is aimed at strengthening democracy, not undermining it. The PF had 10 years to fix our electoral system and instead left it riddled with irregularities. Now that we're cleaning up their mess, they cry foul. But here's where it gets complex, viewers. Even some neutral observers acknowledge that the UPND government has been unusually aggressive in its approach to the opposition. Several PF members remain in detention on charges that some legal analysts consider questionable. The frequency of these arrests, and their timing, often coinciding with important political moments, raises legitimate questions about motivation. Civil society organizations have also weighed in. The Zambia Council for Social Development issued a statement calling for transparency in all proposed electoral and constitutional reforms and urging inclusive dialogue that brings all stakeholders to the table, not just the ruling party and its allies. Then there's the international dimension. Western donors and regional bodies like the African Union have been watching Zambia closely. The country has long been viewed as a beacon of democratic stability in the region. A place where power transferred peacefully even when emotions ran high. But if Lubinda's accusations gain traction internationally, it could affect foreign aid, investment, and Zambia's diplomatic standing. The ambiguities are what make this story so compelling and so troubling. Is Lubinda a whistleblower exposing genuine threats to democracy? Or is he a politician weaponizing institutional fears for partisan advantage? Can both things be true simultaneously? What we do know is this: democracies don't collapse overnight. They erode gradually, through small procedural changes that seem reasonable in isolation but accumulate into authoritarian systems. The question Zambians must ask themselves is whether they're witnessing legitimate reform or the early stages of that erosion. And here's perhaps the most unsettling aspect: in modern African politics, the line between those two things has become razor-thin. Viewers, thank you so much for watching this edition of InspirAfrica Official. This is a developing story, one that will shape Zambia's political landscape for years to come. We want to hear from you. What do you think about Lubinda's allegations? Are these genuine concerns about democratic backsliding or political opportunism? Do you trust your government to reform in good faith? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a real conversation going, because these questions affect every single Zambian. We'll continue following this story closely and bring you updates as they unfold. The truth, as they say, has a way of emerging even when powerful people would prefer it remain hidden. I'll be back tomorrow with more news, more analysis, and more of the stories that matter to Africa and the world. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop questioning. This is Nakash, signing off. Take care.